Hello, Manure Expo. We've got a panel lined up here about the cost benefits of custom manure applicators. My name is Mel Limas, and I'm the Executive Director with OPACA, the Ontario Professional Agri-Contractors Association. We came together in 2017 about a manure-related issue, but we represent all the custom workers and manure applicators in Ontario. So ultimately, what we're talking about here is we want to do a better job for the environment. This is why we're here at the Manure Expo, to do a better job of managing nutrients for the environment, but also for farmers' bottom line. So contractors are a great option because they often can cost less. They have the experience and equipment, licenses, etc. But this is always the discussion, like to hire a contractor or to do it yourself. So we wanted to dive in with an expert panel here where we can really get into the numbers, but also the intangible costs and savings of hiring a contractor or doing it yourself. So I'll have all of you just quickly introduce yourself, and then we'll dive right into the discussions.
Yeah, I'm Dan Brick from Brickstead Dairy here in Greenleaf, Wisconsin. So we're 20 miles, we live 20 miles south of Green Bay, Wisconsin. We are 1,000 cow dairy that generally we focus in on dairy cows. We run about 1,200 acres, grow a lot of corn silage, a lot of alfalfa, buy all of our grains. We have 13 full-time employees, and I'm a fifth generation dairy farmer, and we've been here for over 170 years from Ireland.
What's in this in the picture?
Oh, yeah, so we do a lot of no-till planting. So this is a low disturbance manure applicator that applies manure without disturbing all of our cover crops that we do plant. So we plant 100% cover crops on all over ground, all over 1,200 acres. And this is a way of doing that without disturbing our cover crop.
And is this your own or a contractor?
This is a contractor. This is actually we are renting this manure applicator from a neighboring county that rents it out. It was our way to bring it out to a farm to try it out. And then we did, our applicators have purchased a unit similar to this after we demoed that.
Excellent.
I'm Adrian Guntensperger. I own and operate Guntensperger Farm Services. So we're a dry custom manure spreading operation. We are in Seaforth, Ontario, which is about 30 minutes off the eastern shore of Lake Huron. We cover about 130 customers on a 100-kilometer radius along the Lake Huron shoreline, all the way south to the 401 at Woodstock.
I'm Rick Martens, Martens Irrigation out of Minnesota. We have had a custom application business since the early 80s. Hose drag system the whole time. We were one of the first hose drag systems that were out doing custom work. So we've seen a lot of changes and a lot of innovation over all the years. We've been part of the Minnesota Custom Applicators Association from the beginning and inception of it, working together with other applicators to watch environmental issues, to get educated, and to reach out to state agencies, but also to work with each other, get to know each other so that we can support our business within the state and around our neighboring states.
John.
I'm John Molenhuis. I'm with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. I've been with them for 20 years in business management, working on financial benchmarking and cost of production information, including budgeting machinery costs and the custom farm work fact sheet, along with the custom farm work survey that we complete every 3 years.
Excellent. Well, welcome everyone, and I'm gonna stop sharing the screen so we can see each other's faces a lot better, and start right into the discussion. We'll come back to some charts later, but John, I wanted to hear just a little bit more about you know, like there's custom rates fact sheets across North America. You've worked on them here in Ontario. How do you go about getting those numbers, and why do you think they are so important, both to farmers and to contractors, having those numbers?
We do a custom rate survey every 3 years, and we get so far we're getting 200 plus responses every survey that we do on a full range of field crop operations, from tillage right to harvest, as well as the manure applications and spray applications. Really, it is positioned as, a guide, a starting point for those to get a sense of what their costs are. As well, from a farm perspective, they can calculate their own costs and then start looking at those custom rates, making the decision whether it's better for me to do it myself, or is it cheaper for me and better for me to work with a custom operator or to rent or access that equipment differently than just purchasing it myself. So it helps from that standpoint. From a contractor, I get quite a number of calls from folks looking for, I just did some work for my neighbor. What should I charge for the custom rate? So again, it's that starting point, but I always reinforce the fact that you got to know your own costs, because those will vary, and that average is just that. It's an average. So there are folks that are above that and below that. So it's really important for them to know their own costs, but it's a starting point. As well, the custom rates, like for me, it's useful, and it's got use beyond just the farmers and the contractors. I know governments and researchers and academics use those as, it's in Ontario anyways, it's some of the best information we have on the machinery costs for different field operations. So it becomes a pretty valuable resource when we're trying to do analysis on different operations and different cost of production. It becomes a pretty valuable piece of information that we can get machinery cost information.
Yeah, definitely. And I like that it's the beginning of a conversation. And I know custom operators also like to know what everyone else is charging too. It's just as interesting for them. To Dan, do you use numbers like that, that are available in Wisconsin? Like, what sort of factors go into that decision-making process for you? Are you gonna buy, rent, or hire a contractor?
Yeah, we're looking at all the numbers all the time. We can have all the numbers in the world, but at the end of the day, a lot of it depends on labor, what we're going to do there. So, we always look at that. And, and me as a producer, I've got many other things to focus in on. So maybe part of the reason why I custom hire somebody out, because, if I'm focusing on, or the crew is, hauling manure, we're losing on somewhere else, so we got to really decide what we're going to focus in on our business part of it. But yes, we're using the numbers all the time. We're always trying to find, we're always, the other thing is just weighing out the fact of just to be able to get it out there. We're trying to change that mindset too, of manures, instead of being a liability, it's more of an asset. It always should be an asset, but I think for a while there, it just become a liability. It's just the cost of getting stuff out, and however we can get it out there as cheap as possible. Sometimes what we were looking at, but that's not the way to do it. We got soil compaction and everything else to consider with that. So, so there are a lot of unforeseen numbers out there that, on the agronomy side of things, that we also have to look at. That's really hard to come up with on those numbers because of the fact that it's hard to gauge. We know our cost of hauling, labor costs, stuff like that. We're able to watch, but there's those unseen numbers that sometimes we can't see.
Yeah, excellent. And let's dive in. I'd love to hear from, Adrian and Rick. John, I'll share my screen again, because I'd love to get into the details about how do you set those custom rates.
So basically, when we look at determining custom rates, we basically break it down into your depreciation, interest, basically cost of ownership, and your operating expense. And then you have your overhead, which is basically the cost to run the business, right? So as this slide shows, fuel, repairs, labor goes into your operating costs, and then you get your depreciation and your interest into the cost of ownership. And then you have your basically your cost of operation, your fuel, your repair, and your labor, right? So And then one thing what we do is you have to know your trade-in or your salvage value, right? That at the end of its assumed life, what's it still worth? So can you go to the next slide, Mel?
Yeah. Well, before we go to the next slide, I wondered if John, you wanted to add on to this, because I realize it is your slide.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like on the right side of the slide, the main factors, and talking with Adrian there, if you have your own numbers, that's the best source of information. So your fuel consumption rates, and your maintenance program, so you know what the repair rates are going to be and some of the repair costs on that side of things. So if you're somebody that's just looking at a new piece of equipment and you don't have those numbers, there are several fact sheets out there that can help give you some guidance and some of these repair rates and trade-in value, depreciation rates that can help give you some ideas of what these numbers could be or should be. And so then those then drive the numbers on the other side as well. And one other point that I wanted to make here, in the other overhead section, if you are a dedicated custom farm operator, one thing to keep in mind is that other overhead may be larger than if you're a farm that's just looking to do some, one or two custom operations, right?
Right. Yeah.
Your other overhead, like your accounting fees, your cell phone bills, those things that may be paid for by the farm. If you're a dedicated custom operator, that's going to have to all come out of that custom rate. So those are the things that you need to be considering and thinking about, depending on what the custom operation that you're looking at, and whether you're a dedicated operator or whether looking to just do a little bit of custom work on the side if you're a farm as well.
Yeah. No, good to keep in mind. And Adrian, these are your numbers. I'd love you to speak to them. Really, the question is, how does this compare, like custom rates compare to how much a farmer could do it for, or even to renting? But yeah, let's take us through a walk through these numbers and your thought process that went into it, and then we'll get some reflections from the rest of the group.
So what I did here is I took basically equipment that we have purchased in the past year, and I kind of put the numbers to them of what an average farming operation would use them. So if you look at the tractor, right, you have your purchase value, and then I determined, okay, so an average operation, let's say, puts 500 hours on that tractor per year over 5 years. So that's 2,500 hours, right? And then I determined that at the end of that 5 years, that piece of equipment is valued at 60%. And then I figured a 3% interest rate, and I figured 2% inflation. And I put that into the cost, because to replace that unit at the end of its life, what you're replacing it with will cost more money than what you bought the original unit for. So you're already compensating for that in your cost, and you don't get stuck with that at the end in the life of the next piece of equipment, right? And then you get fuel consumption, fuel price, and then wages. So I factor that all in. Same with the spreader, right? So the spreader, because this is a farmer, I figure that spreader would last him 10 years with assumed usage of 40 hours per year. Now, this is an average operation in Ontario, right? So he would get a total usage of 400 hours over that period of time. If you go to the next slide. So then here I took those numbers and I break them down on a per year and per hour base, right? So I basically divide your depreciation over the lifetime of the piece of equipment. Same with the interest, inflation, and then in the per hour column, it divides it out on a per hour basis. With the tractor, of course, that tractor is also getting used for other tasks around the operation, whether it's planting, maybe they're hauling other types of manure, harvest, whatever, right? Because the average operation wouldn't just buy that tractor for manure spreading, but the spreader is very specific to that operation, right? So if you look at the depreciation, the financing payment per hour, right? If because they're only using it for, let's say, a week of the year, you still have to make payments on that piece of equipment, right? So that is basically where you will see the advantage to the custom operator.
Okay.
So if you go to the next slide.
Yep.
So now this is how I determine my cost, right? So if you look at the dollars per hour on the tractor, so we're getting 3 times the use out of the tractor that the customer is, but we're only $5 per hour cheaper on the tractor, right? And then the 125% efficiency in my operating cost is because $110 per hour is on a per engine hour basis, and we're only billing about 75% of those hours, right? So I need to charge more per hour in my custom rate to compensate for the engine hours that we're putting on traveling to jobs and all our unproductive time. So that is why our operating cost is higher than our actual cost per engine hour on that tractor. And then for the spreader, so because we are dividing our cost of ownership over 800 hours per year as opposed to just 40, so that is where your biggest cost saving is from the custom. And then my overhead, basically what we do there is all my cost, my extra cost over and above the cost of operation. I take that and I divide it out by all my build hours over the whole year. And then if you add those 3 categories together, that's how we come up with our rate of $215 per hour.
Yep.
on a tractor and spreader.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. So if you go to the next slide now.
Yeah, ultimately bringing it together.
So yeah, so all that being said, what I did is I took 3 jobs across different types of operations that we do, and I figured out, based on, if I were to do this, or as a farmer were to purchase the same equipment we have as outlined in the last 2 slides, what his cost would be based on the efficiency per spreader and what we did it for. So if you look at the first column, so that's a 78,000 unit chicken farm. We go there once a year. Yeah, it's usually somewhere between 500 and 600 tons. We covered 120 acres, right? So we did that with 3 spreaders. Took us just over 7 hours, 65 loads, and it was 2 kilometers distance. So that customer's cost was $5,800, which is just over $10 per ton.
Yep.
So if he were to purchase the equipment himself, same size spreader, with his own loader, so doesn't have the loading efficiency that we have. So I figured it would take him somewhere 25 hours. So on the way the cost is outlined, would cost him somewhere around $9,000. So he's saving $3,000, and it's done in one day. You know, we're in and out in a day. He can go about his business. He has to do nothing, and he's saving money on that.
Yep.
And then if you look at the second column for dairy, beef, 80 cows. So yeah, with dairy and beef, it's a lot more volume and weight. Right, if you look at the tonnage for 1 year, right, it's considerably more, right, more loads. So same thing, right? If you look at the increase in time, so he's almost 3 times the hours that we are, right? So for a dairy operation to do his manure in that kind of a time frame, you know, they don't start at 7 o'clock in the morning because they're still doing chores. So by the time they get going, it's 8, 9 o'clock, and then by 3 o'clock they have to go back to the barn, right? And their other daily chores are getting put off to the next day, right? So there's more advantages than just time there. So all of a sudden, those 60 hours get spread into a week. Now, in this case, this is spread over four different applications per year. But if you look at his cost savings to own that equipment, right? He's saving almost $9,000 per year just on the physical cost of spreading.
Okay.
And then the third column, that is one that's windrowed in the field. So this is a larger customer that we do, and all of his turkey manure is trucked to the field and windrowed. So we spread that after wheat. Yeah, so we'll do 300 acres. Well, we did this 300 acres in 10 hours. It's 123 loads with 3 spreaders, 4 operators. So that cost him just over $5 a ton to spread. Based on the cost that we figured in the last 2 slides, if he were to do that himself, that would take 36 hours and pretty much not quite doubles his cost, right?
Yep.
In this case, so this customer is a larger cash crop operation. He justifies his equipment across large acres already. And he used to do all his own spreading. And he says his cost, when we first started doing work for him 3 years ago, his cost was $5 a ton. And he said that for him, it's a no-brainer because what I charge him is the same as he figures his own cost is. And his reasoning was that they just don't have time. He was tight on employees. He used to spread on and off for 3 to 4 weeks of the year. And now when we come in and we'll do 300 acres in a day, he'll get 2 or 3 pieces of tillage equipment running to get that all worked in. So he has one guy spreading cover crop ahead of us. We're doing the spreading, and he says the timeliness of getting the fields worked, getting his cover crop established and worked in is worth more to him, especially if my cost is the same than what he
exactly
figuring his cost is.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for sharing these numbers. And also, if there's Americans watching right now that think that this is quite a steal of a deal, I do want to mention this is Canadian dollars. And yeah, but I'd love to hear from the American side, Dan, Rick, any comments on these numbers?
Adrian, or the last example you just gave, as far as that farm able to do other things, we run our land also like we do our milking parlor. I mean, we're milking 24/7. That's where our income comes in. We only have, we're in the northern hemisphere here too, and we only have so much time to grow stuff. So if we're trying to put winter wheat or cover crops, we grow triticale or rye, anything like that for forage. We need to get that planted immediately after corn silage is done. So some of it is just we factor that in. Even if it costs us more to, we're not just looking at the cost of the manure hauling, it's what we're losing on the other end by spending all our time manure hauling and making sure that we get this done correctly. We spend the money. We know the data. If we plant our cover crops later, or even if we're planting winter wheat, for us here in Wisconsin, it's anything after September 10th, we're losing yield on our triticale crop the following year, anything that's planted after that. And so if we can't get that in because we're messing around with manure or anything like that, we're losing money on the other end of things. So
Interesting. Did you have any comment on Adrian's numbers? Did they look kind of right? And none of his examples had 1,000 cows, which we don't often have 1,000 cows on this side of the border. So how does that factor in having a larger operation?
Yeah, I think so. I think the numbers are very similar to ours. The problem where we get into, and I've been able to keep our manure within 2.5 miles of our dairy. But, we got dairies around us that are trucking 20 miles liquid manure, 20 miles. So
Wow.
that cost goes up, threefold at that. But obviously, but yeah, the numbers are very comparable to ours. It's, we talk about loading or anything like that. It's, when we get in here, we want to get it done. Just mainly, for public relations part of it is because it's always chaotic on the roads, anything like that, when we're hauling sand solid manure out. If we stretch that out over 2 to 3 weeks, the neighbors are getting pretty upset about it. But also the numbers are very comparable. It's about efficiencies when you're hauling, but at the end of the day, the cost is very comparable to us. So.
Yep. Rick, what about you? How do your numbers compare? If you're willing to share them.
I'm actually, there's a difference between solid and liquid, but a lot of the numbers are similar of how we arrive at them.
Yep.
When I'm determining rates, I work a little bit more off a gut feeling and what's going on in the market. So we look at, like from John, we look at what are some of the custom rates that are out there right now. And it's, if another custom operator is able to operate at that, we should be able to, so that we need to align our business. But, we got to take into a lot of account, what are the industry standards? What are fertilizer prices doing? Because the manure is also very comparable to what fertilizer. What are the commodity prices doing in that year or trending for the last few years? Particularly for myself, I do mostly dairy. So what's the milk doing? Can my customers stand a price increase or can't they? If the prices have been low and they haven't been able to make it, it's awful hard to justify raising my price on top of everything else that they have. So I look at that for myself. I don't know if that's right or not, but that's what I do. We need to keep the prices fair for both us and the customer.
Yeah.
If the customer can't make it, then we have no customers. If the applicator or the custom business can't make it, then they don't have any services. So we have to really look at if we both go broke, or who's going to survive in this.
There really is a shared risk and shared reward. Yeah.
And then size of operation, depending on what your goals are for your operation. Trying to balance efficiency and productivity. How many gallons per hour can we knock out? What are the size of the fields? What is our regular customer base? We're better off to have in my opinion, have a regular customer base than trying to find new customers every year. Sizing our equipment to that customer base. That also plays into the factor of how much can we afford. Making sure that we can handle the workload. We can't take on everything because we just won't get it done. And then we got upset customers and we don't have that regular customer base. So we have to be timely in our application, have satisfied customers. And I joke that with my customers, they're happy when we're coming, they're happy when we leave. Kind of like when relatives come to visit. Alongside of what Adrian just said here too, from the liquid side, if we're going to put together a hose operation for a single farmer, you're probably going to have a $500,000 to $750,000 investment just for the basic system of hoses and pumps and toolbar to do a good job, depending on what size of operation you have and how much manure you have to deal with. So I took those numbers at a 5% interest and a 7-year depreciation or 7-year payback, and that's $7,000 to $10,500 a month, which means at a penny a gallon, you'd have to have 700,000 to 1 million gallons of manure a month to justify that expense. And that doesn't include any fuel, labor, repairs, or overhead expenses. So you need to take a hard look at them numbers of whether you want to invest into that equipment or not.
Yeah, the numbers make more sense over a long range of time.
Basically, our rates that we do, and you got to understand that in my particular territory and area, we're a depressed farm economy. We're not, we're not the big, being able to be we're trying, but we go anywhere from 8.5 cents to a penny one a gallon for our first mile of application. And then on top of that, it's based on application rates. So if we have to put it a lower application rate, it takes more time to get to that lower. It's harder on equipment. So we increase the price on that by 1/10 or 2/10. Distances for every mile, you can basically go 1/10 to 2/10 of a cent for every mile that you want to go out. And I'm finding that you start getting over 2 or 3 miles, it actually costs more to do that than less, because of having to go and rent equipment or have that equipment in stock sitting around for just a few jobs. So it depends on the size of the operation. But I would say as a typical rate, you would be anywhere from 8/10 to a penny 2 for that first 1 to 2 miles would be a pretty good average in Minnesota.
Okay. What about and a bunch of you already talked about this and thank you, Adrian, for sharing, and all of you for sharing those hard numbers. But what about the kind of the intangible costs and benefits on either side?
I'm going to answer that. So on our own dairy farm, all our liquid is custom hauled. So use alfalfa as an example. If we were to tank 180 acres, that would take us, even with 2 tanks, probably 2, maybe 3 days. And we want that manure on basically within 24 hours after the harvester leaves the field. So we get a guy in with the drag hose. It's drag hose close to home, and the further away fields are trucked. And he has the capacity of spreading those fields in that time frame. So we're not hindering the regrowth. So you can't really put a dollar value on how much more regrowth, but we're looking at it as, if you can see tracks in the field, if the regrowth is behind in each track where the tank or even the drag hose went because we were too far out after cutting, that's got to be worth something on yield, right? And if you don't have enough feed, it costs a lot of money to buy feed, right? So that's how we justify it on our family operation.
The other thing is just the cost of being able to have all that GPS, like you said, our maps. So if you get a map, what was covered, we're under our Department of Natural Resources, restrictions here in the United States. So we have all that, on file if anything ever did happen. So we've got our coverage maps and everything else. So one thing is for something to happen, and another thing not to be able to show documentation of what happened makes it even worse. So
I think a piece of it also is the expertise. It goes hand in hand with technology and all of that. If you do it twice a year on a limited amount, you're not as good at it if you do it consistently. And that goes through all walks of life in any career that you have. If you just do a little bit of it, you're not as good as the person that does it on a daily basis.
It's hard to put a value on that expertise. That's a good point, Rick.
And
I would add to that as well. Like I know that you talked about, sort of the labor piece, not having the labor, and the having custom operator is a way to get that labor that you may not have. But another one is it frees up capital as well. So if you're not having to buy that equipment, you may have opportunities to invest that in other parts of your operation that will have, a bigger return on the investment than the machinery will. So that part of it as well. And it's been mentioned as well, now being able to use that manure as a resource versus a cost, right? It's more seen as part of the cropping plan, part of the fertilization plan, not just something you got to get out before it gets too muddy to get out, right? It's seen more as a resource and an investment into the soil.
What about kind of the environmental good? Like, obviously we're all under the gun improving the public trust of agriculture, and especially when it comes to manure application. Like, how do we know we're doing a good job, and how do we do a good job, and what are contractors doing to ensure that those best practices are followed, and does that cost more?
I would say it definitely costs more to do a good job, but it's also a cost savings in the end. We can go out and just apply manure at, huge rates and put it as a waste, or we can go out and use it as a resource. It does cost more. Technology costs. Technologies are always increasing. In the manure industry, in the last 20 years, we've seen a tremendous amount of technology that come in. You go back, nobody was using flow meters or anything. We were just estimating what we were doing, and flow meters became the industry standard on the liquid side. And I'm sure they are. Scales on the dry side now has been, became a industry standard. So we actually know what's going out. We can document in the last, 5 to 8 years, GPS with applied maps and applied, tying it together. It costs money. These GPS units and auto steer are not cheap, but there again, like John was saying about the capital, how much capital do you have to invest into this to do a good job? And then on the other hand, we have to do a good job, or we're going to have the environmental and regulation things coming in on us and shutting us down, or preventing us from continuing to do a good job and putting further restrictions on us and causing us to say, this is just too much. I'm done. I'm not going to produce food for the world anymore.
Mm-hmm. That's a much bigger picture cost benefit analysis now, isn't it, Rick?
We need to be able to be telling, the regulators and society what's being done, how it's being applied, and the precautions that you're putting in place to safeguard the environment and to safeguard the watersheds and the soil, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And also public perception.
Yes.
Danny alluded to it, the neighbors pushing in and everything coming in. If we do a good, clean job, if it looks professional, whether we're doing it ourselves or we're doing it, having someone hired to put the manure on, if it looks professional, if it looks like it's done right, we're not going to have near as much problems as a sloppy operator.
Yeah.
Or just saying, heck with you, I'm going to do what I want because I've done it so many years. Public perception is huge.
Yeah. Oh, you have cowboys down there too? Yeah. Well, and I know here in Ontario, tire deflation systems have become almost the norm for contractors. And that's definitely, it's saving the soil and soil compaction. But also I know that's kind of a win-win too. You said, Adrian, it's better for the contractor, better for the tire, the life of the tires. But I guess, are your customers asking for the flow meters, asking for the squishy tires, or is that something that contractors are really taking the lead on, the stewardship side of it? And how would you pass that on to your customer? Do you charge extra for that? It was like 10 questions.
It is a win-win situation. You have to look at, and from a business standpoint and a smaller operation like mine, I can't do everything at once. So I have to pick and choose what is going to be the most beneficial for my customers and what can I afford this year doing into this. I've been putting off buying a boat, agitation boat, for quite a number of years. And I finally put it into our lineup because it is a benefit to the customers. It comes with a price. There is an upcharge for it, but the customers are very receptive to it, seeing the results of it. So it's kind of a balance back and forth of, if you're in the industry, you see the benefits, what works, what is good. There again, being part of an association, talking to other people, what's working for you, what isn't, what toolbars are people looking for? Dan is looking at doing all cover crops and keeping those cover crops out there. That works really well in some areas. Other areas it may not. We have so many different situations. We really need to go to the needs of our customers and actually walk through with the customers. sometimes they sit down and they'll say, well, I want this much, I want the lagoon on this field, and empty it. Well, maybe as a custom operator, we can go in and say, you know, you might be better utilized if you spread that out a little bit. Or, you know, let's look at your plan a little bit here. What makes the most economic sense for you?
Yeah, there's a bigger conversation there for sure. Anyone else?
So yeah, we don't charge extra for the inflation system. Basically, the cost of the system, I guess, is built into the original capital investment of the spreader. But that we upcharge using it, we don't. It's just there. We use it. Mel, you asked if farmers are asking for the
Yes.
technology. So I find the most progressive operations I have are asking for the scale inflation system. But on average, I have a lot of operations who are not familiar with the technology, or they don't really know what they're getting till they get it. And then they come back the next time and be like, oh, that was really good. I got all that information. I gave it to my cropping consultant, and he's going to use that in our planning for next year. So sometimes, yeah, you think the farmers should know, but they don't realize the differences in the service till they actually get it.
Yeah, it's, yeah, no, this has been an interesting conversation. There's the numbers, obviously, but then there's a lot more than just the numbers in terms of that decision-making process to hire a contractor or not. Ultimately, we do just want to do a good job. We want to improve the public trust in, especially in livestock agriculture, on both sides of the border. So it's an important conversation to have, and I'm really hearing that it takes both farmers and contractors a will to keep improving and keep using the best management practices, and there may be some cost to that, but in the long run, Rick, to your point, the ultimate cost would be to lose that public trust. And so that's an even bigger conversation that I think is part of this Manure Expo this year. So thanks everyone for listening, and I think we've been taking questions throughout this whole presentation, but we'll have our contact information there on the website if you wanted to follow up. Can all wave now? No.